Hello and welcome to Mr. Moulton's PowerPoint presentations. I'm going to, over the next few minutes, go ahead and talk to you about Colliding Worlds, Chapter 1, 1450 to 1600 from our textbook, and we'll go over some content here. We need to make sure that we understand that this early time period, it even kind of goes earlier before that. We have something called BC, which is before Christ, or that would kind of be zero when it comes to a religious and a technical dating of chronology. And then we have AD, Anno Domino, in the year of our Lord, events that happened after the birth of Jesus Christ. So we just kind of need to understand as we're talking about BC and AD over the next couple slides what that means. Now, in 2010, this is approximately what the United States of America looked like. But when we jump back many, many years, this is basically what it was BC. Just a bunch of land, not very many people here. Now, we did have some Native Americans that were here, and they, as they were living here, there were Europeans that were also arriving during this time period, perhaps upwards in excess of 60 million, give or take, occupied the Americas. 7 million of those Native Americans lived north of modern-day Mexico. So kind of put that into your brain that there were about 7 million north of Mexico, modern-day Mexico, and then all the others lived in Mexico and south below that. There were some migrants that came over from Asia, and they crossed a land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska, modern-day Alaska, between 13,000 and 3,000 years ago BC. So if you look at a map of America and specifically Alaska, and you can look over and see where Asia is, that is the area where they would cross, and I will show you a picture of that here in just a minute. About 8,000 years ago, give or take, we had a second movement of peoples. These were the ancestors of the modern-day Navajos and the Apaches, the Native American groups that we might be familiar with and are aware of within and around America. You have the Aleut and the Inuit Eskimos. Those are, the people, those are the Eskimos up in Alaska and that area. They had a third wave around 5,000 years ago, and then ultimately a lot of those people that came over from up north up there made their way towards Mexico and into central Mexico. Here we can see a map. If we look right up here, we have Siberia leading over into modern-day Alaska, and then them spreading on down throughout modern-day America and into modern-day Mexico and Latin and Central America. Now, we have the Aztec and the Incas. These are Native American groups that you might be familiar with, you may have heard of before. These were some of the great, massive empires of the Americas. They had thousands and thousands of people. They had a very productive agriculture. They had a very established government set up, a very aggressive bureaucratic state. So we have the Aztecs down in Tenochtitlan, about 1,500 to 2,500 or 250,000 years ago. Tenochtitlan, if you're not familiar with that, it is the modern day city of Mexico City. You had the Incas down in Cusco with about 60,000 people. So these people are not new. They were here established as the Europeans eventually start to make their way over later on that we will talk about. Here you have a picture of modern day of ancient Tenochtitlan. Like I said, it is modern day Mexico City. And then you have the Machu Picchu, which you may have heard of before. They're close to where the Cusco were, but not exactly the same. You have Lake Texcoco and Tenochtitlan down in Mexico City. You had the Aztecs that here we can see a artist rendition of them performing human sacrifices. So they were very ritualistic and had a lot of beliefs that they truly believed in very deeply. Now, as far as the more modern day native experiences go, we have the maize agriculture that spread from Mesoamerica to North America around 1000 AD. Now, maize, kind of like modern day corn, so we can be able to understand and relate to that. Down in the Mississippi Valley, so modern day Mississippi Valley area, you have the Adena and the Hopewell. You have the Mounds Indians, which literally create mounds. They would have burials and ceremonies in the rulers' homes all within these mounds. And as the Europeans started to come over, they were encountering these people, interacting with them. You have the Eastern Woodland, the Algonquian and Iroquoian. Once again, these are Native Americans that are growing maize, also known as corn, beans, and squash. They also hunted and fished and gathered for foods. And they were kind of broken up into some different areas. You had the Great Lakes, Native American group. You had the arid Southwest Native American group, which is kind of where we would live today here in Nevada. And then we have the Pacific Coast. Now, the Great Lakes, some of them were the Ottawas, the Ojibwas, and the Potawatomis. And they thought themselves as a single people. They didn't realize that there were other Native American groups out there. Now, next are the Great Plains and the Rockies, and I'll show you a map of all these different areas here in just a second. You have the Comanche and the Sioux, and they changed how important the horse was. The horse they were able to domesticate and be able to use as a powerful tool and weapon in their dominance. Now, the arid Southwest, like I said, kind of over where we are, Anasazi Native American group. They had large farming settlements, mostly growing a lot of maize or corn. And then in the Pacific Coast, these were very diverse. Before the Spanish came, you had the Chinooks, the Catsallish, the Haidas, and the Tlingits. And they used a lot of fishing and were very smart when it came to fishing based on their geography and their need for survival. Here you can kind of see a map. We're obviously over there in kind of that orangish color labeled Great Basin, but you can see some of the different regions, the Great Plains, the woodlands, the southeast, and those different areas that lead to many different Native American groups. Now, these Native Americans, they established trade networks, so modern day roads, freeways that we use to be able to ship goods on as well as we are able to travel on, but on a very simpler term. These trade networks, they would be hundreds or thousands of miles in length and very rudimentary trails. They would ship raw materials, tools, ritual artifacts, decorative goods, slaves, meat, pottery, cotton blankets from one tribe to another, and this is how they were able to buy and sell. Now, they also had some very religious beliefs that were very important to them. Some of them are kind of what would be known as an animist, so they believed that the natural world was suffused with spiritual powers. Trees and animals and different things could hold spiritual powers. They also interpreted dreams or visions. Think of, maybe you've heard of Native Americans and maybe you've seen something known as a dream catcher, kind of plays into it there. And then they had many rituals, whether that was a war ritual, a hunting ritual, farming ritual. Maybe you've heard of rain dances and different things. Those are some examples of some of their rituals that they had. Now, many of the Native Americans had societies that were established, and so here with the Western Europeans, as they're going to eventually make their way over, the people over in Western Europe had very hierarchical societies. Okay, the authority came from above. Think of it kind of like a triangle. And at the top of the triangle would be the king, and then little lower princes and nobles, men who ruled, and women were subjected to the men. So at the top you kind of have those that are in charge, and then as you work your way down, that's when you start to get the peasants, farm workers who lived in small villages. They had to basically survive by constantly working, whether that was farming or whatever it might have done. And they also had strong religious beliefs. Another word for this kind of triangle that kind of plays into these hierarchical societies would be feudalism. They also too had trade networks back in the 12th century. Merchants from Italy are now trading into the Mediterranean, and they are starting to expand out as well. Now, as far as some of the other things with this European people that maybe you are familiar with, once again, they had some very strong religious beliefs and myths. They believed in the natural world, sun, wind, stone, animals, also had very influenced by spiritual forces. You have Greece and Rome and the Roman gods and different things like that that many of you are familiar with. You also have the introduction of Christianity, where you have Jesus Christ as being a divine savior, a redeemer, a son of God, as a belief that was going around. Many of these beliefs were kind of underground. Specifically, the Christianity wasn't really talked about until about 312 AD, when you have the Roman Emperor Constantine, and you kind of get the resurgence of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, with the Roman Catholic Church, there is a little bit of controversy there and drama with something called the Crusades. where they went out and tried to reverse the Muslim advance, Muslim being another religion in Europe, and win back the Holy Lands, and it led to a religious war. Then you get something called the Reformation. They wanted to reform. Some people by 1500s thought that the Catholic Church had kind of changed some of their beliefs and some of their ways and wanted to bring it back to the way it was supposed to be. So in 1517, you have a man by the name of Martin Luther. Not to be confused with Martin Luther King Jr. from later on, okay? Martin Luther, he wanted to reform the Catholic Church. So what he did is he took a list of 95 things that he felt were wrong with the Catholic Church and posted them on a door. And that was his way of trying to reform or say, hey, everybody, look, the Catholic Church is not what it used to be. Some things have changed, and he wanted to fix that. You also have John Calvin in the 1530s. Now, this is where you kind of start to break off into other religions. So if you have the idea of Christianity as a whole, the Christianity is a religion or a person that believes in Jesus Christ. But then underneath that, you have multiple denominations. You have Protestants and Methodists and Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Catholics, and all. There's countless religions that all believe in that. The one being Jesus Christ, but their beliefs and practices might be a little different. And many of those churches started here with this Reformation in the 1500s and carried on after that. Now, going back in time again, we have Homo sapiens in Africa. That is the original human beings, ultimately. About 100 million, give or take, by the year 1400. There was a lot of gold, domesticated cattle, cotton. They worked the copper and iron to be able to have goods, to be able to trade things. And they also had a belief in multiple gods and spirits. So when we think of early man, that's kind of where oftentimes the thoughts direct ourselves is to Africa and some of the things there. Now, all these groups, they're ultimately going to go out and start to explore and ultimately kind of take over or conquest other places. So Europeans started to engage or interact more with the wider Atlantic world, Atlantic being the ocean, around 1400. You have Prince Harry of Portugal, who wanted Arab merchants' riches in golds and slaves. So you have Portugal mixing with the Arab nations. You have the Europeans that start to spread out. They're mainly going south into Africa and taking over islands and countries in Africa and tribes there. These islands in these areas started to make cash crops. A cash crop is something that can be grown or harvested or whatever and can ultimately make a lot of money. Here in America, you're going to have cotton and tobacco, which are going to be cash crops. But you have wheat and wine used, or grapes, excuse me, for wine. Honeybees, livestock sugar, these types of things would be used as cash crops. The Europeans, they tended to stay on the coast of Africa as they would go in and conquest those places because they were afraid to go farther into Africa because it was very well defended. There was yellow fever, malaria, dysentery, which were diseases that could hurt them. Sailors at this time were also spreading further and further goods to more and more places. So you have cinnamon and pepper. Those are things that we experience on a regular basis, but they were huge in the way of trading. Very, very, very valuable. You also have the Portuguese, who became the primary group that were taking over the African slaves and buying and selling those. And slavery is not new, and it's not unique just to America. Slavery was all over the world, but it was massive in Africa. As one tribe or one village would go and attack and fight another one, oftentimes whoever lost, the losing tribe would become the slaves of the winning tribe. AD 700 to about 1900, you have what's known as the Trans-Saharan slave trade, with approximately upwards of 9 million slaves being sent across this trade network, being bought and sold, and different things. Now, these sugar plantations by the Europeans in Brazil and the West Indies, they needed slaves, and so they were taking slaves from Africa and sending them to those sugar plantations. Now, the Europeans were also looking for something called the Northwest Passage. So think of geography, think of North America. They wanted to be able to get around the globe up top, if you're thinking about a map or a globe. They wanted a way to get to Asia going west instead of east. Now, The problem taking the eastern route to Asia was that it took a very, very long time. And I'll kind of show you a map here in just a second about that. But there were some that were like Christopher Columbus, who believed that they could get to Asia or the Indies by going west. The problem was they had no clue what was out there. They didn't realize that there was a large landmass, aka the Americas, that they were going to run into. Okay, so here we can kind of see a map. We can see North America. Okay, Asia, or excuse me, Europe here, they wanted to go west, which if you're looking at the map is left, and think of it like a circle. They wanted to make their way around the globe and pop up on that side of Asia, kind of on the right side as you're looking at the map. But as they went west, or they went left out of Europe, they ran into this continent called North America. And this is basically, there in blue, or the darker blue, excuse me, that's what the Europeans knew about the world in 1492. And then that's overlaid on a map of modern day the world, and we can see how much they didn't really know about. In the 1400s, the European route to Asia took quite some time. Many explorers began looking for a western route. So here we can kind of see these arrows as to where they're getting to Asia. That's how they were getting there, and it was very difficult. Took a long time over land, over water. But there in blue, they were hoping to go that direction and be able to also get to Asia. But instead, they landed in modern-day Americas. Now, here we can see some of the European explorers, some names, and where they explored. So down there towards the bottom of the map, the bottom half, we can see Columbus in 1492. If you know the little catchphrase, sailed the ocean blue. Christopher Columbus never actually made it to modern-day North America. We can see Verrazano did, and some others, but Columbus basically explored the Caribbean Sea, modern-day Cuba and the Bahamas and those types of places there. Okay. Now, Spain was the first European main power to lay claim to the New World, with Columbus in the 1490s. The navigator of the first recorded European expedition to cross the Atlantic in search of the elusive route to Asia, Christopher Columbus landed on the islands in the Caribbean Sea. His voyage stimulated exploration of what was, for 15th century Europeans, an undiscovered world, the Americas. Now remember, he had 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Those were those 3 ships, which you should probably have learned possibly all the way back in elementary school. But he set the path, and after him many other people came. Here we can see a picture of Christopher Columbus right here. Now, that kind of sums up Chapter 1, okay? If you look on page 35 and 36 of your textbook, there will also be a little summary there that you can be able to work on. And then page 37 will give you some insight through some question and answer of different things that you can know. So that is the exploration of Americas. We have a little bit into the Native American groups that were already here. That's why they are called Native Americans. The Europeans that came over, Spain, specifically Portugal, those places, they weren't here first. They may have been the first Europeans to colonize, but the Native Americans had been here for a long, long time. If you have any questions, please make sure you reach out and let me know.